Good day and welcome to another session of Storytime. And today I've got my kids' portraits up here. The youngest is Ruben and Stian and Tessa. And I've got them up here today because in the story of David today, we're about to see the consequences of a father's sin in the rest of his family. And then, because he is the king of the nation, into the rest of the country. The consequences of sin. Also, keep in mind that today in the story, we're going to see where there's a lack of consequences, where there's not righteous judgment practiced, how that's going to have repercussions in the life of two people, both Joab and Absalom. So this entire story, if you look at it in that light, is really a powerful lesson as to the consequences of sin. But let's kick off then a bit earlier, where we were in chapter 11, the whole affair with Bathsheba. And David tried to keep it under covers, and God then came forward through the prophet Nathan and said, David, this is what you've done. David's response immediately is, Lord, I have sinned. And let's read his words out here. This is what the Lord says through Nathan. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. To which David replies, I have sinned against the Lord. And then listen to the Lord's words again. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. Now, it sounds like it's all just going away. But that's not what the Lord says. He says, David, I have taken away your sin. You are not going to die. So I will not let you pay for the fullness of the sin that you have committed. Now, for us, reading it through the cross of Jesus Christ, we know Jesus already died for my sin. So for all of eternity, I will live with God. I will have the freedom of being cleansed in his presence, justified. But the Lord is not saying the consequences of sin is just going to be taken away. Otherwise, me and you would live in heaven today. There will be no consequences of the past mistakes that we have made. That's not what the Lord says. He continues to say, but because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for me, the Lord, the son born to you will die. And we'll see that some of those consequences that the Lord has spoken about in verse 11 and 12 just now as well will also come about. So there's a massive lesson for us here. Is David forgiven? Absolutely. Is there going to be no repercussions for what he did? Absolutely not. It's going to ring out in his family. He opened a door and he demonstrated to his family a way of life that some of them will walk into, and it's going to bring serious hurt. So it's a good reminder for us. There is forgiveness for our sins, but sin still has repercussions. It still breaks apart. It still hurts, even if, like with David, it was done in complete secrecy. So then we go out to chapter 13. We immediately start to see those repercussions in his family with Ammon and Tamar. Ammon, who raped his sister, who is half-sister. And then Tamar's full brother Absalom murders his brother Amnon because of that and flees out of the country. And then Joab comes back into the story. So just a quick catch up of where we've seen Joab already acting in his own authority, disobeying the king, where he killed Abner. Remember, he murdered him when Abner came peacefully to the king. And there was no consequences to it yet. David, who rightfully as king should have brought consequences down on Joab's head for committing murder in his country, did nothing about it. Joab then connived with Absalom, convinced the king through a whole plot with a lady who played a role to bring Absalom back into the country. And then Absalom was told, you will not see the face of the king ever again. It wasn't enough for him. He was back in the country, but he wanted to go on living as freely as he wanted to. He wanted to see the king. And so he burned down a field of Joab, you remember. And Joab came and said, what have you done? Why have your servant burned down my field? And then he says, man, it would have been better for me not to have come back to the country if you can't even get me to see the face of the king. No thankfulness towards Joab for getting back him into the country. Nothing like that. Just makes his commands. And finally he does see the face of the king after 2 years. And now we catch up the story then. And we're going to see how this lack of consequences towards Absalom and towards Joab, together with David's own choices, brings massive destruction to many people, and especially to the heart of this beautiful king. So in chapter 15 then, for the next 4 years, we see Absalom busy making a plot to take over the kingdom. He's planning a conspiracy against his own dad. And it starts with him then getting up early in the morning with 50 men that he hired to run ahead of him. So he's calling attention on the road. Everybody's seeing this great retinue. And, oh, who's coming? Oh, it's Absalom. And we're told that Absalom is more handsome than anybody else in the entire kingdom. The Bible goes as far as to say, as from the tip of his head to his toe, there is no flaw in him. He is absolute perfect beauty. And he's got this lush hair in particular that the Bible calls attention to. When he cuts it once a year, it's 2.3 kilograms of weight that they cut off. Wow, he must have had an incredible bush of hair. Well, he would get up early in the morning and then on the road, going to the gate of the city, he would sit there with his men, and anybody coming on the road who wants to get justice for some case that they bring towards the king, he will call them over and say, oh, what a pity. There's no representative of the king to hear a case. He's just lying. And then he says, oh, if only they would make me judge in Israel. I can hear the cases and I can solve these things. In other words, my dad is making a hash of it. He's not taking care of your affairs. Ugh, if only I could do it, I'll do a better job. It's basically what he's saying. And then if the people would come and bow down to him, because he is a prince after all, and he's incredibly handsome, and he's got this big following of 50 men all the time, he would quickly stretch down, take their hands and pull them up and hug them and kiss them. And the word says, and so he started to steal the heart of the people away from his dad. He's growing a following. And then he went to his dad after 4 years of playing this game. And he said, Dad, when I was still in Geshur, in other words, in exile out of the country because you rightfully should have put me to death. When I was still there in Geshur, and I said, if I ever come back to Jerusalem, in other words, if the Lord would show me grace through my dad, the king, then I would go to Hebron and I will worship the Lord there. So please let me go. And his dad said, it's right, go in peace, my son. If only David could know the weight of his words at that moment. Because Absalom is going to Hebron to get the conspiracy up and running against his dad. And his dad says, go in peace, my son. So while in Hebron, he did bring sacrifices to the Lord, but it's all a sham. Because he sent messengers out to get certain men to come and follow him. And one of those is Ahithophel, that incredibly wise counselor to the king. We're going to be told in a chapter or two that those who would come and ask advice from Ahithophel in those days asked as if they were hearing it from the mouth of God himself. This man was just filled with wisdom. Take note, it's not saying that everything that he said is God's heart, is righteous, is good, but it's wise. In other words, it's cunning. It's going to fulfill its purpose. He knew how to get where he needed to get. And so he called Ahithophel over to his side. Now, why would Ahithophel then turn against David, the king? Well, if I read the story between the lines, it's because Ahithophel's granddaughter is Bathsheba. The king, David, had his son-in-law killed to take his granddaughter as his own after he slept with her. And it really seems as if Ahithophel has this grudge against the king because he joins Absalom in this conspiracy. And then a word comes to David and said, listen, Absalom is getting a conspiracy together in Hebron. And immediately the king knows the danger, and he commands all his officials and his family, pack up, we better leave the city now. And so in a rush they leave the city, and David only leaves behind 10 of his concubines to look after the palace while he's gone. They're in a hurry out from that place. Zadok the priest and Abiathar, they come also carrying the Ark of the Covenant to go with David. And they put it down next to the road while the family and the officials of David come by. And while they come by, they're bringing sacrifices to the Lord, obviously interceding, praying, please God, spare us, save us from this conspiracy that's coming towards us. And once they've passed by, David said to them, return to the city, don't come with me. Take the Ark of the Covenant back into the city, and if it pleases the Lord, he will bring me back to this place to reign again. But if it does not, let his will be done. It's his decision. Just the absolute humility of this king to give this over into the hands of God. Say, God, your will be done. But then he says to Zadok and to Abiathar, those two priests, he says to them, and send me word of anything that you hear from Absalom. And that's extremely wise of the king. He's saying, listen, I need an inside man. I need to know what the steps of Absalom is if I'm going to be safe now. And there's another picture of how he walks up the Mount of Olives, leaving the city. And it's just such a tear-jerking picture that it says, and David walked up the Mount of Olives with his head covered and bare feet and tears running down his face, weeping to the Lord. So this is not just a political crisis, a kingdom crisis. His own son is coming to take over the kingdom from him by force. And he knows something about his son's heart, because he's fleeing and saying, we will not survive. We will be killed by my own son. What an incredible, hurtful thing. And while he's walking up the hill, he prays and he asks the Lord, Lord, please confuse the advice of Ahithophel that he would give to Absalom. Please turn his advice into foolishness. He's walking up the Mount of Olives, just pleading, interceding. And as he gets to the summit of the hill, there's one of his friends, his confidant, Hushai. And he says to Hushai, Hushai, please, go down into the city. Go to Absalom and say you will be on his side, so that you can counter the advice that Ahithophel gives to Absalom. David just knows. Ahithophel is like a chess player. He's going to figure things out. He's going to work out how to defeat me. If his advice is followed by Absalom, I'm toast. And so he sends Hushai down to be the opposite. And as Hushai comes to the city gate, at that moment, Absalom and his party comes into the gate, and he meets with him. And Absalom says to Hushai, what kind of a return on your friendship to the king is this, that you would join my party? And Hushai just says, well, no, my faithfulness is to the chosen one of the Lord. Him I will serve. And after all, shouldn't I serve the son as I've served his father? And that convinces Absalom that Hushai is on my side. Now I've got two advisors of my king. And the first thing that Absalom does is he asks Ahithophel, listen, here we are in the city now. David has fled. There's the palace. What's the first thing that we should do? And Ahithophel says to him, it's easy. Pitch a tent on top of the roof of the palace, and then take those 10 concubines that David left behind and sleep with them where the entire city can see it. And then everybody will know that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and their hands will be strengthened in the battle against your father. And he does it. Now, does the Bible say that Ahithophel's advice is like that which God would have given. It's not what it's saying, right? It's just saying it's really cunning. It's a wise move. He's about to enter into battle with his own dad, and the people around him needs to know, are you really against your dad? Because we're risking our lives fighting with you. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. You're absolutely against your dad. The two of you will not sit together again. And therefore their hands are strengthened. And then the second piece of advice, Ahithophel says, and get 12,000 men together. It's not a very big army. Get 12,000 men together and chase after your dad. Because the people with him will be weary. They'll be tired from running away this quickly. Nothing has been planned. It's all in haste. And chase them down and catch them while they're tired. And they will be unarmed. They couldn't get ready for battle. And then while they're tired like that, only strike down. Move to strike down only one man, your dad, the king. And then all the hands with him will be lamed. And they will be yours. And Absalom says, all right, Hushai, what do you say? And Hushai starts by saying, the advice that Ahithophel gave this time is not good. No, the men with David are fierce. They're fighters. They're as tough as nails. And your dad himself is like a bear who's lost his cubs. He's gonna fight for his life. And after all, the chances of him sleeping with the people tonight is very slim. He's clever. He's gonna hide himself somewhere away from the party. And then if you attack him tonight and you lose the battle, then the people with you will be weakened. They're gonna say, David has the upper hand. Maybe we shouldn't follow Absalom. And then you'll lose. No, rather send word for the whole of Israel from Dan to Beersheba and call together such a massive army and come down on him like the dew of heaven. In other words, you cannot escape it. It's all over. And then wipe them all out and you will have the kingdom. So what Hushai did, he's played to the Absalom's pride and his arrogance. Oh, that sounds like a nicer battle. That's a massive battle. It's a huge army, the whole of Israel fighting with me, wiping out all of David's men. All of that just played to the man's ego. And so, him and the commanders with him decided that's the better plan. We're going to go with Hushai's advice and not with or Ahithophel. And then Ahithophel, we told, got his donkey, drove back to his house, put his affairs in order, and committed suicide. He knew it's done. We're going to lose. I chose the wrong side. I shouldn't have gone with Absalom. We're not going to get the kingdom. In wisdom, he just knew this is it. We made the wrong move. On the other hand, we just need to follow David quickly as he left, because there's a few characters that would meet him on the way out and again on the way in, and there's a whole interplay there. So one of them is the man called Ziba. Ziba, the previous servant of Saul. And you'll remember from the story of Mephibosheth, that lame grandson of Saul who stayed in the palace with David, that the property of Saul was given to Mephibosheth, and Ziba, the previous servant of King Saul, was told to look after all of that property on behalf of Mephibosheth. And now Ziba came with a string of donkeys, and on these donkeys were laid, and I've actually made a list of it. It's just such a massive gift. It's altogether 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of fig, and a skin of wine. And at seeing this, David says, Ziba, what's this? And he just says, it's a gift for the king. I realize that in your haste, you left, you're going to get hungry on the road. You're going to get tired. You're going to get thirsty. So the donkeys are for your family to ride on, and the food is just to refresh the people. And obviously David asked, well, where's your master, Mephibosheth? What is Ziba that he can bring such a massive gift? Where does this gift come from? It comes from the master, right? And he says, no. Mephibosheth decided to stay in Jerusalem because he said, today the Lord will return to me the kingdom of my grandfather Saul. What is he saying? My master is conspiring against you. He wants to take over the kingdom, use this circumstance to regain the throne. And at that, David said to Ziba, well, Ziba, I now give you all of the property that used to belong to your master. In other words, all of the property of the previous king of Israel is now yours, servant of Saul. Wow. Let's jump forward. At David's return, Ziba again meets the king, but this time Mephibosheth is also there. And Mephibosheth says to the king, listen, I'm like a dead dog. He comes up with that phrase again. He says, I'm just reserving absolute grace from you. I don't deserve any of it. But I need to tell you that this servant, Ziba, he betrayed me. And he left me behind when I wanted to come with you. And he told you a lie. I did not conspire against you. And now David is caught between the two. Well, who's telling the truth? And so he just says, you'll split the property. Ziba, half of it is yours. Mephibosheth, half of it is yours. And whoever over there used the circumstances for his own gain, we don't really know. We're not really told. It looks like Ziba cheated on Mephibosheth. But either way, we see that as a story. Somebody using this chaotic circumstances for their own gain. Trying to grab something while the king is on the run. It's horrible. Another strange character who we meet along the way is a guy called Shimei. And Shimei is, while David is going past a cliff, running away from Absalom. Shimei is on top of the cliff. And he's from the tribe of Benjamin, which is important. That's the previous king's tribe. And while David, with this incredible horde of people, are going by, this guy is brave enough to hold down insults on David. And he just shouts, the Lord curse you. You who cheated on your master. You who shed the blood of Saul and his family. You unfaithful servant. The Lord is returning on your head all the evil that you have done against Saul and his household. Now, we know that's not true, right? This man from the tribe of King Saul, for him it looks like the truth. And so obviously, one of the commanders of David walking next to him, Abishai, says, let me go up there and kill this guy. And David just says to him, what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? Now the sons of Zeruiah is who? There's Joab, Abishai, and then Asahel, who got killed by Abner, right? They're the commanders of the army. He says, what do I have to do with you? What if it's the Lord that is speaking through this guy, rebuking me right now? Should I not receive it from him then? What a humble statement, eh? Incredibly humble statement. Here's a guy throwing rocks on him, literally kicking dust on him and hurling down curses on him while he's in the dregs of it. This guy's kicking a man while he's down. And David just says, listen, leave him. Let him go on, throwing his curses, kicking the stones, throwing the dust. Maybe it's from the Lord. And then he says wisely, if it's not from the Lord, then the Lord will take vengeance on him, and the Lord will take pity on me for what I'm having to suffer unjustly now. Well, as he comes back to the kingdom after this whole war, there's Shimei meeting him. bowing down, asking for forgiveness, saying, please, please, please forgive me for what I did on that day so foolishly. I mean, he knows the king has the power to get it back at me right now. I can lose my life because of what I've done. And again, Abishai is there and said, yes, let me take him down now. Let me kill him for what he's done. And David says, no. What have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? I'm coming back today and the Lord has blessed me. The Lord is returning the kingdom to me. Should somebody be put to death? And he just says, you're forgiven. What an incredibly gracious man this is. A humble man this is. We learn so much out of how he acts in the middle of an incredibly distressing time, an unjust suffering. And yet he's willing to bear with it, and the Lord restores him. Powerful. Well, Absalom obviously then follows the advice of Hushai, and there David is ready to camp at the fords next to the Jordan River, on the western side of the Jordan River. And Hushai gives a message to Zadok and Abiathar and says, listen, you better get this message to David. This is what Ahithophel says. He says, go and attack them now. Get David. You're in danger. Don't sleep on that side of the Jordan. Cross over as quick as you can to the other side. Now they're already tired. So this messenger ran out and through a small little village, and somebody saw this man leave the village and obviously thought this is a spy going to take a message in a hurry to King David. And so they hunted them down. And on the way, passing through a village, a woman took this man, hid him in a pit, put a cloth over it, and put some grain over the cloth so that nobody will know there's a pit. And when these guys came and searched and says, a messenger ran, where is he? She just says, no, he went that side. And they couldn't find him. And then the guy came out and took the message to David, and they crossed over that same day to the other side. In the meantime, Absalom is sending out the messengers all throughout the country, getting a massive army together to fight against the previous king, David. Or well, still the king, but the king who might be dethroned. And the battle finally happened on the other side of the Jordan River in the territory of Ephraim, which is a forested area. And David set up his army under 3 commanders, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. And as these guys went out of the city where David was there, David stood at the city gate, and at first he said, I'll go with you into the battle. And the men just said, not a chance. You're not going to go with us. Your life is worth more than 1,000 of ours. If you die, we lose the battle. This battle is about your life today. And David then says, all right, I'll do what you say. I'll stay. And as they go out of the city gate, company by company, under these 3 men, he says to Abishai, Joab, and Ittai, in the hearing of everybody, please be kind to the boy Absalom for my sake. And out they go into the battle. And we're told that the battle was extremely fierce that day. Interestingly, though, as it was fought in the forest, we're told that the forest took more lives than the sword in that battle. So whether that would be from animals or from falling and bumping into trees or whatever it may be, the territory was just as rough. So 20,000 men fell, and in that battle the people of David had the upper hand, and they were winning. And then somewhere in the battle, a man came running to Joab and said to him, I saw Absalom hanging from his hair in a tree. He was riding his mule underneath this big oak tree, and his hair got stuck in the tree, and the mule ran off, and there he hanged. And Joab says, well, why didn't you take his life? You would have got a champion's honor, a belt and a sword. You would have been rewarded. And this man says, no. I heard what the king said. And if I had killed him, I know you would not stand next to me when I have to answer for it. And so Joab just says, man, I don't have the time to argue with you about it. And he took his men, he surrounded Absalom with 10 of his own armor bearers, and they struck him down. They took him and they threw him in a deep pit there in the forest, and they covered him over with rocks. That's not what David said. It's not what David asked. Whether it was right or wrong for Joab to have done that in terms of the battle, in terms of strategy, that's another question. But Joab absolutely took matters into his own hands. So let's just retrace our steps again for Joab. Remember, right at the beginning of the story, we said, look at what kind of a commander of the army David is. Even to his own harm, he obeyed the king. Even if it cost him personally, even if the king was blatantly wrong, he obeyed the king. He served him faithfully. Joab is quite the opposite. Joab murdered Abner, a man who came with a peace treaty to the king. And he nearly cost him very dearly there, the reign over the rest of Israel. He nearly cost the king a heck of a lot. He was never corrected for it. He was never judged for it by the king. He should have been. He's a murderer. Even though he's the commander of the army, even though he served the king so well, he's a murderer. There should have been a judgment cast over him. And then he conspired in all this thing behind the back, just connived with Absalom. And here Absalom comes to conspire against his own dad and to take over the kingdom. Again, Joab's conniving in the background is costing King David dearly. And now it's costing the son, which he clearly told him, be kind to him. He doesn't just strike him down, he throws him up a pit and he piles stones over him. This is a prince of the king that he's treating in this way. There's no respect. There's absolutely no respect to the man that he's absolutely supposed to serve, King David. Well, one of Zadok's sons are there in the battle, and he says, let me run, let me take the message to King David to tell him that we have the victory. And wisely Joab says, you're not the right guy to do it today. You're not the right guy. I mean, he's just so excited. He wants to take the message, but Joab knows it's a good message, but it's a message with hurt for the king. His son is dead. And so he says, no, Cushai will go. He's not a close relative. He's not a close friend to the king. Let him go with the message. And he runs off. And Zadok's son continues to haggle with Joab, says, no, but just let me go. Just let me go. I want to take the message. He's just excited. He wants to run with it. And finally he says, man, go. And then he goes by the plain, and he actually comes quicker to where David is in the city. And as he's approaching, there's this really touching part in the story of David's anticipation. How did the battle go? How's my son? My son is in that battle. My army is fighting against my son. What's going to happen? And so somebody says, I see a man coming. I see a messenger running. He says, oh, they're probably coming with good news. He's just expecting, really expecting, pleading, please Lord, let it be good news. And then it says it's the son of Zadok. What's his name? Ahimaaz. It says it's Ahimaaz. It looks like the running of Ahimaaz. It says he's a good man. He's coming with a good message. And it says, oh, there's another man coming. Oh, he too must be bringing good news. It sounds like the king is just trying to convince himself. Say, oh, it better be good news. It better be good news. And finally, when Ahimaaz comes, he says, good news. We've won the battle. And immediately David says, what about my son? What about Absalom? He says, well, there was some confusion. I don't know. Ahimaaz is clearly lying. Everybody knows the battle ended because Absalom died. After Absalom died, the rest of the army of Israel scattered. They stopped fighting. So he's not telling the full truth. And then the Cushite comes and he brings the news. And when David asks, what about my son? What about Absalom? The Cushite says, may all your enemies be like this man. In other words, he's dead. And David just breaks out weeping I mean, there's just no better way of bringing the emotion across than David's own words. Let me find it for a moment. As he went, leaving the gate into his inner room, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." You just hear this man weeping, weeping, weeping. I mean, his own life is spared. His own kingdom is spared from the sure disaster that Absalom would have brought. But his crying is for his boy. And so when the army returned, it says they returned like men defeated. Because even though they won the battle, they knew that their king was weeping. And so towards the end of the day, Joab comes to the king and he says, "Listen, I better warn you. If you don't go out and speak to your men, all of whom were willing to give their lives for you today in that battle, then by morning, none of these men will remain. Because you are saying that the life of one man, your son Absalom, is worth more than the life of this entire army." And so the king came out to the gate and he spoke to his men, obviously thanking them for what they've done for them, what they've risked in that battle. Well, then there's this entire strange occurrence at the end of the battle, because the guy who had the conspiracy is dead. The army who followed him scattered and went back home, and the king is on the other side of the Jordan River. He's not in his palace. So what now? And David starts sending messengers across the Jordan saying, "Listen, men, when are you going to bring back your king? I've always served you. I've always, even in Saul's days, I've gone ahead in your battles. I've fought the battles for you. When are you going to bring me back? Why are you so slow to bring me back?" He specifically sends a message to the people of Judah and saying, "I'm your own flesh and blood. Why are you not bringing me back?" And then he sends a message to a guy called Amasa. And he says to him, "Amasa, you will be my next commander of the army." In effect, he's saying, Joab is fired. Why? Because Joab killed my son. Joab did not obey my command. And Amasa is then a key part of getting the people and the elders of the country together to come and bring the king across the border. But then when they bring him across the border, there's this whole fight about, but who brought him back first? No, but David belongs to us. He's from Judah. And the rest of Israel is saying, but we came first to come and bring him back. We were the first to speak of it. So, and then Judah says, well, we've got a greater claim in him because he's from our tribe. He's from the tribe of Judah. And the rest of Israel says, but listen, we've got a 10-fold, 11-fold claim in him because we've got so many more tribes. And then there's this whole infighting, political rivalry happening in the nation. And in the middle of that, there's a man called Sheba. And we're told he was a scoundrel from the same clan as Saul, from Benjamin. In other words, he's got a bit of a claim to the throne. He's from the same clan as the first king of Israel. So if David's position is uncertain, then maybe I can use the opportunity to reach out and grab the throne. And so in the hearing of everybody, he shouts out, saying, what have we to do with David? We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son. Every man to his tent, Israel and Paul. In the middle of this raucous, uncertain circumstance, this man's sudden shout out is the trigger, and everybody scatters and they leave their king. Well, David then gives command to his new commander of the army, Amasa, and he tells him, go and get an army together to go and take down Sheba of Benjamin. Obviously, I need to take this guy out because this guy is dividing the nation. This guy is causing destruction. And he says to him, in 3 days, get the army together and I'll send you off to battle. And Amasa takes longer than 3 days. For what reason, we don't know. But David is becoming anxious because he knows the longer I'm going to leave this thing, the deeper it's going to fester, the deeper destruction it will bring. And so he says to Abishai, Joab's brother, right? He says to Abishai, listen, you get the army together. Amasa is taking too long. If we don't nip this thing in the butt, Sheba is going to cause more destruction than Absalom did. And so Abishai gets the army together. In the army is also Joab, his brother. Obviously, he's going with. Still, the king have not put a judgment over Joab for what he did. And off they go. And on the way, they meet Amasa returning with the men that he has gathered for this battle. And we're told that Joab had a military tunic on, and underneath the tunic there was a dagger in his belt. And as he came close to Amasa, he pretended that this dagger dropped out of its sheath, and he picked it up with his hand and then came closer to Amasa to give him a hug and a kiss. And because of the way that the dagger came into his hand, Amasa didn't suspect anything. He wasn't on his guard, and so Joab took the opportunity and he murdered Amasa, cut him open, and he was lying by the road as the men passed by. And so they pulled his body out the road so that the men could not stop but continue to go. Just clear daylight murder. Killed the new commander of the king and went off into the battle. By this time, Joab had become absolutely ruthless, absolutely lawless. He has done wrong and he was never corrected. He goes and done wrong and never corrected. And by this time, he's a murderer through and through. He's a real squally. Well, they go off into the battle, and Sheba hid himself in a city, a walled city called Abel. And they circled around the city, and they were about to break it down when a wise woman called out from the wall and said, Joab, why are you coming to make war against this city? This used to be a place where people said, let's go and get advice at Abel. This is a godly city. It's a good city of Israel. Why do you come and destroy the city? And Joab says, well, it's not that we want to destroy the city. We just look for one man, Sheba. And this woman says, wait outside. We will deal with him, and we will throw the head of Sheba over the wall. They killed him, threw over their head as proof of it, and the battle is done. Just incredible how such a short, awkward story, but just the wisdom of one woman saved the entire city. Just to ask, what's going on? What's going on? And she saves the city. But I want to really close with this challenge for us. How do we serve those in authority over us? How do we serve them? Just consider yourself in your household, in your workplace, in our community, in our province, in our country, in the church, in every sphere of life. How do we serve those in authority over us? Are we like David? David, who takes correction from God, puts his things right, and still receives if hardship comes, and just with humility, Lord, maybe you teaching me, maybe you are correcting me, maybe you are opening a new way, or you are setting things straight in my life. Or are we like a Joab who wants to take things into our own hands, who throws off authority and only uses it for our own gain? It's really a massive challenge. And then for us, I think as parents, maybe even in the workplace, we have to ask, how do we put discipline in place? Is godly discipline part of the way in which we lead? Now, I got this family back here, my kids, And we have to, before we leave the story behind of the whole Bathsheba and David affair, we have to ask that question. Are we walking in holiness? Because if we are, we bless our families. We bless those we lead. We bless everybody that we've got influence over. But if, like David, we come and allow a door of sin to bring destruction into the family, do we purposefully go by the grace and the blood of Jesus Christ and ask, plead with God for forgiveness, return away from sin, and repent openly so that restoration can come? Because if I read the story right, David made right with God. It doesn't seem like David openly made right with a family ever. Restitution there to say, I've sinned. That's not the way we walk. That's not the example I want to lead you into. I think that's part of the reason the door was open for destruction to come through the family and through his family as the royal family into the nation. Well, next week we will finish off with 2 kings, and we will come to Solomon on the throne of Israel. So an exciting turn of chapter for us as we go out of 2 Samuel into 1 Kings. May the Lord bless you.